On July 22nd, 2025, Nigeria's National Assembly complex, it became the stage for a pretty remarkable standoff.
Yeah, it really did. You had suspended Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan showing up determined to get back to work.
Exactly. And she was citing a court judgment. She said backed her up. But this wasn't just, walking back into the office.
No, it definitely sparked a major clash. You had conflicting wills, different reads on the law, and frankly, quite a bit of political theater.
So today we're going to unpack those conflicting stories, look at the legal arguments flying around, and really get into the thick of it using the sources we have.
That's good.
So just to set the scene, Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan, she represents Kogi Central. She'd been suspended for 6 months back in, well, some reports say May, others March 2025.
Right. And that suspension came after she accused the Senate President, Godswill Akpabio, of sexual harassment. That's the backdrop here.
Precisely. So she arrives, supporters with her, holding this federal high court judgment. What actually happened right then at the gate? Let's get into that confrontation.
Well, Natasha's version is pretty clear-cut. She arrived, as you said, having already stated publicly she planned to resume her duties.
Armed with that court order from Justice Bentanyako.
Exactly. And the scene itself was reportedly quite tense. Security was visibly ramped up. Armed personnel everywhere. Her supporters were there too, converging near the entrance. But despite, her stated intention and the court document,
she was stopped.
She was. Denied entry by armed security. They apparently just said they were following orders. No further explanation given at that point, it seems.
Wow. How did she react to being physically blocked like that?
Her reaction was strong. Deep disappointment, but also quite a bit of anger.
I can imagine.
She directly accused Senate President Akpabio of, a serious abuse of his office. She even called the Senate under his leadership the worst in Nigeria's history.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And she kept insisting, I was duly elected by my people, and argued that Akpabio cannot be greater than the Constitution. And here's a fascinating legal point she raised. She noted that Akpabio had appealed the court ruling personally as an individual.
Right.
But the Senate, as an institution, apparently had not filed an appeal against that specific judgment allowing her return.
Okay. So she's drawing a line between the Senate president acting alone and the Senate as a whole. That touches on separation of powers, doesn't it?
It really does. Can one person's appeal negate the institution's obligation or perceived obligation to follow a court order? That's a key question here.
So her story paints a picture of defiance against a court order by the Senate leadership. But of course, the Senate itself had a completely different narrative.
Oh, absolutely. A starkly different take.
How did they explain denying her entry? What was their official line?
Well, Senator Yemi Adaramodu, who chairs the Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs, he basically dismissed her whole attempt.
Yeah, so...
He called it skit making and political theatrics. Pretty dismissive language.
Yeah, that definitely frames it differently.
And crucially, Adaramodu stated that the Senate viewed the court's ruling not as a binding order, a compulsory directive, but merely as an advisory opinion.
An advisory opinion. That's a major difference in interpretation.
It is. It suggests the Senate felt they weren't legally obligated to let her back in based on that specific ruling. It really highlights that tension, between branches of government.
It does. So the court ruling wasn't a mandate in their eyes. What other justifications did Adaramodu give?
He made a couple of other points. First, he said enforcing court judgments is technically the job of court bailiffs, not the person who won the case, the litigant.
Okay, a procedural point.
Right. And he also said it was baffling that she seemed to be appealing parts of the court's decision while simultaneously trying to enforce other parts, or at least her interpretation of them.
What did he mean by that? What was she appealing?
Well, Adaramodu stressed the court judgment didn't actually overturn her suspension itself. Instead, according to him, it ordered her to apologize, pay a N5 million fine, and retract a social media post.
I see. And that was the ruling she has appealed.
Exactly. So the Senate's position was the suspension itself stood, and the court laid out conditions for her, which she was appealing.
Okay, that adds complexity. And why block her physically on the day?
Adaramodu cited her approach. He described it as confrontational, mentioning a mob, people carrying placards, and even chanting war songs. He said the Senate would never allow anything that smacks like illegality to enter the chamber. He insisted they acted within their powers under Section 60 of the Constitution and their own rules.
So their stance was, The suspension is valid, the court didn't definitively overturn it, and her approach was inappropriate.
Essentially, yes. And that their action, the suspension, remains in place until the court issues a clear, definitive declaration saying it was unconstitutional.
Right. So this brings us smack into the middle of it all. Two powerful bodies, the judiciary via the court ruling and the legislature via the Senate, with totally different reads on the situation and their own authority. How do you even start to untangle that?
Well, if you zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. This whole episode really throws a spotlight on a critical tension in governance everywhere, not just Nigeria.
Which is?
It's about how court judgments get interpreted and, crucially, enforced, especially when they bump up against things like legislative privilege, the special rights and immunities lawmakers have, and the internal rules that legislatures use to govern themselves.
So it's this constant push and pull between the court saying this is the law and the legislature saying we have our own rules and privileges.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interplay. You see judicial decisions meeting parliamentary autonomy, and each side asserts its own understanding of where the legal lines are drawn.
This deep dive certainly shows how complex things can get beneath the surface of what looks like one event. There are just layers of legal interpretation and political strategy.
Definitely.
And for you, listening, it's perhaps a useful reminder to always look for those different perspectives, to consider all sides, and think about the fundamental principles clashing underneath.
Yeah, it's rarely black and white.
So as you think about this, here's something to maybe mull over. In a system where major institutions can interpret legal rulings so differently, who actually gets the final say on what counts as law or order? And what does that mean for how government works and for public trust in the long run? Definitely something to think about.